The wind carried a hush across the barren ridges, a whisper that seemed to follow Elias Ward as his horse trudged the dry Texas soil. The sun bled into the horizon, painting the sky in copper and violet, and though the land stretched wide and open, loneliness pressed against him like a weight he could never put down. His hands, weathered from years of holding reins and rope, gripped the letter in his pocket as though it were a lifeline, though its words still gnawed at him like thorns under the skin. $50 for a ranch, one condition: never abandon what is left behind. Strange words, haunting words, and yet they had lured him here after 15 years of drifting, after 15 years of burying his heart beneath silence. He had known sorrow deeper than dusted trails and harsher than the desert sun. His wife's laughter had once filled the hollows of his life, but death had stolen her away and left him wandering, a ghost tethered to saddlebags and cattle herds. For a decade he had closed his heart against all warmth, against the healing embrace of companionship, choosing the endless horizon over the comfort of belonging. And now, when he thought he had nothing left to give, the ink of a dead man's hand had drawn him back toward a place carrying secrets of its own. The ranch rose before him at last, a silhouette worn by weather and time. Its fences sagged, its barn leaned like a tired old man, and the house stood silent, its windows reflecting only emptiness. Yet Elias felt something stir beneath that silence, something hidden, waiting, as if the land itself breathed with memory. He dismounted slowly, boots striking the earth with a rhythm that echoed his pulse. The porch creaked under his weight, dust rising as though to greet him, and in the stillness he unfolded the letter once more, his eyes tracing the words he already knew by heart. Never abandon what is left behind. Inside, the air smelled of dust and faded wood, the echo of lives once lived clinging to the walls. He touched the cracked mirror, the rocking chair, relics of a past still warm, though its owners were gone. And then, when silence threatened to swallow him whole, a sound broke through, a ripple of water, followed by laughter, light as birdsong, yet edged with surprise. He froze, his breath stilled. The noise drifted from beyond the barn, down where the land dipped into a hidden pond. Curiosity tugged at him, cautious and sharp, but stronger than fear. He stepped toward it, the earth crunching beneath his boots, each step carrying him closer to the truth Harlan Reeves had buried in ink. The reeds parted with his approach, sunlight scattering in shards across the water, and there before him, like a vision carved from both beauty and sorrow, were 3 young women. Their hair shone dark against the glittering pond, their laughter spilling until it broke on the sight of him. Faces turned, eyes wide, and time itself seemed to hold its breath. Elias's heart kicked hard, torn between retreat and the instinct to reach for the revolver at his side, yet neither instinct fit the moment. The women moved quickly, scrambling for clothes, voices tumbling in fear and urgency, and within the span of a breath, they were gone. Wet footprints marking their retreat toward the house he had thought abandoned. The echo of their laughter lingered like a ghost in the still air, and Elias stood unmoving, the letter's words burning hotter now than the setting sun. He understood then, dimly but surely, the promise was not about fences, cattle, or tools left behind. It was about them, flesh and blood, hope and memory, 3 souls bound to this place by a past he had yet to uncover. The weight of it settled into him like stone, and though uncertainty gnawed, he felt something stir deep within. a reason, fragile yet healing, to stay. Evening folded over the land, shadows stretching long, stars blinking awake one by one. On the porch, faint voices rose inside the house, whispers weaving with caution, with the tremor of fear. And as Elias listened, he realized that his wandering days had brought him here not by chance, but by some deeper pull, as if the universe itself had conspired to place him before this threshold, at the edge of a story that was no longer his alone. And so it began, not with fire or gunpowder, but with silence, laughter interrupted, and the weight of a promise that would alter the course of every heart within those walls. As the night settled, Elias lowered himself onto the porch rail, the stars glittering like fragments of memory, and knew he would not turn away. He had entered a bargain that was not only ink and paper, but blood and soul. The ranch was not empty. It was alive, guarded by 3 hearts that needed not just protection, but the healing touch of someone who would not abandon them. And if you feel this moment stir something inside you, perhaps a memory, perhaps a hope, let it remind you of the quiet truth that love often begins where loneliness ends. Stay with this story. Let it heal the corners of your heart as it unfolds. And if these words have reached you, like a soft hand brushing yours under starlight, I gently invite you to share your thoughts, to let your voice be heard in the comments, to leave a trace of yourself upon this path. And if you wish to walk further with me through chapters of love, healing, and hope, then like this story, hold it close and subscribe so you may not lose the thread of what is to come. Because sometimes the most beautiful journeys are the ones we dare to continue together. The night deepened, and with it came the quiet murmur of destiny calling, leading Elias toward the next dawn, where truths long buried awaited to be uncovered, and where the fragile beginning of love flickered, waiting to grow into flame. The door opened slowly, hinges sighing as though the house itself had been waiting for this moment. She stood there first, the eldest of the 3, her chin lifted with a quiet defiance that barely veiled the tremor in her gaze. Shadows framed her slender figure, damp fabric clinging where water had not yet dried, dark hair cascading down her shoulders. Behind her lingered the 2 younger sisters, half hidden yet impossible to overlook, their eyes darting between fear and curiosity. Elias removed his hat, holding it respectfully against his chest, his voice steady, though his heart beat unsteady rhythms. He spoke his name, the story of the letter, the strange bargain of $50 that had brought him here. When her reply came, in hesitant but clear English, the air seemed to shift. "We know this letter," he told us before he died. The truth fell like a stone into still water, ripples spreading through silence. Harlan Reeves was gone, his wife too, buried on the hill beyond the barn. Grief pressed into the air, heavy and unspoken, yet carried with dignity in the way the eldest, Marisol, held herself. Her sisters, Taya and Nera, stood close, like fragile branches leaning into one another, their eyes reflecting years of endurance far beyond their youth. Marisol's voice wavered, but did not break as she told the truth of who they were. They had been bought once, like objects stripped of their birthright, torn from their people in violence. But here, within these walls, they had been given not chains, but names, not cruelty, but the tenderness of parents who had chosen them as daughters. And now, with the earth fresh upon Harlan and his wife's graves, they stood alone once more, the world ready to brand them as nothing but property, shadows on stolen land. Elias listened, the words striking deeper than any bullet ever could. He had seen markets where human lives were bartered as though souls were cattle, had turned his face away then, bitter and powerless, carrying the shame in silence. Now that silence had ended, embodied in 3 young women standing before him, asking without words whether he would abandon them as the world had so many times before. His throat tightened, the letter's command pulsing in his palm like a heartbeat. Never abandon what is left behind. He understood now. It was not the ranch, not the fences, or the cracked mirror, or the broken porch. It was them. The decision rose in him without hesitation. He would not send them away. He would not betray the kindness of the man who had once given him food and warmth in his own youth. More than that, he would not turn his back on the fragile hope shining in their eyes, hope that trembled but refused to die. He told them so, voice firm as steel, and in that moment something unspoken passed between them, fragile trust, delicate as glass, yet stronger than any law. Nera, the youngest, stepped forward with innocent boldness, her eyes wide, her voice unguarded. "You really mean it?" Elias nodded slowly, every word in him sharpened by truth. "I mean it." And so he entered their home, no longer an intruder, but something closer to kin, though the air still held tension like a bowstring drawn tight. The house bore their touch now, bread upon the table, the faint scent of herbs drying near the hearth, chairs drawn together as though they had gathered in vigil through nights of fever and fear. It was not empty. It was alive, though wounded. Marisol remained watchful, measuring his every move, while Taya busied herself with dishes, her hands steady, though her shoulders held years of burden. Nera's presence was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, her laughter flickering even when uncertainty weighed on them all. That evening, Elias lay awake beneath the stars, their voices faint inside, blending with the night wind. He thought of his wife, of laughter long buried, and of the vow he had unknowingly accepted the moment he unfolded that letter. His life had been a trail of dust and solitude. But here, on this fragile ground, something new stirred, a sense of purpose he had not felt in a decade. He saw the fences in need of mending, the barn sagging into itself, the orchard half dead, but yearning to bloom again. He saw, too, 3 sisters clinging to survival, and he knew that to keep his word was not merely to guard them, but to breathe life back into all that was broken. Morning broke with silver light spilling across the valley, dew glistening on blades of grass like scattered jewels. Elias rose early, hammer and nails in hand, each strike against the wood ringing like a declaration that this place would stand again. The sound carried into the house, where Marisol emerged with guarded steps, her braid neat, her eyes watchful. She handed him a cup of coffee, the simple gesture startling in its quiet grace. He thanked her with a nod, words plain, yet heavy with meaning. She did not smile, but she sat near him, close enough for silence to bridge what words could not. Then she spoke, not of chores or fences, but of the truth buried beneath the land's surface. She told him of the raid that had stolen their childhood, of the market where innocence was stripped and dignity sold. Her voice trembled, yet it carried strength, as though speaking the story was itself an act of survival. Elias listened, every word striking deep into the marrow of him. The shame of the world's cruelty burned in his chest, but alongside it came something unexpected. A gentle warmth, a healing thread weaving between grief and determination. He had thought himself hollow, emptied of the capacity to care beyond his own survival. Yet here he was, hearing their story as though it were his own, carrying it within him as a promise not to let the weight of their suffering crush them again. Taya passed with laundry in her arms, Nera followed with a broom too large for her small frame, and life, fragile, trembling but real, breathed through the ranch once more. When night returned, the four of them sat at the table together. Bread, beans, the simplest of meals, yet it tasted like belonging. The sisters spoke softly to one another in their language, voices weaving comfort into the air. Elias sat quietly, listening, letting the unfamiliar rhythm heal something raw inside him. He realized then that this was not about survival alone. It was about creating a home where laughter could exist without fear, where memory could turn from sorrow to strength. As he gazed across the table, Marisol's eyes met his, cautious but steady, searching for cracks in his resolve. He did not look away. In that steady gaze lay the fragile beginning of trust, and beyond it the faintest spark of something he had thought buried forever. The night deepened, carrying with it the scent of earth, wood, and new beginnings, and though silence hung thick, it was no longer empty. It was full, with memory, with promise, with the healing breath of a future waiting to be written. And when he lay awake again beneath the endless sky, Elias understood that the journey he had thought ended in loneliness was only just beginning. The letter had not bound him to land or wood, it had bound him to hearts. And with that realization came a truth that would carry him forward. He was no longer a wanderer. He had found something worth protecting, something worth fighting for, and perhaps one day something worth loving. The stars shimmered above, steady and eternal, as though whispering that healing often begins where pain once ruled. And with dawn waiting beyond the horizon, the story pressed forward, carrying Elias and the sisters into the tender dawn of what was to come. The days unfolded in rhythms Elias had not known in years, each sunrise carrying with it both the weight of responsibility and the quiet pulse of something that felt like belonging. The fences stretched, broken and weary, the barn sagged beneath years of neglect, and the orchard stood in half-death, its branches aching for spring. Yet, as Elias worked, sweat clinging to his brow and calluses tearing deeper into his hands, he felt a healing he had not sought but now could not deny. Each hammer strike was more than wood meeting iron. It was grief meeting purpose, loneliness colliding with the fragile possibility of home. The sisters moved within this rhythm too, each in her own way, binding herself to the land and, slowly, to him. Marisol carried herself with the gravity of someone who had long been forced to lead, her hands never idle, her eyes always searching for cracks in the walls, the fences, and perhaps even in Elias himself. She was strength and caution braided into one, a soul unwilling to trust blindly, yet yearning for proof that promises could be kept. Taya, quieter but no less fierce, walked beside Elias in the fields, her palms blistering, her body bent against the weight of work she had chosen to shoulder rather than abandon. Her silence was not distance, but endurance, her steady presence speaking louder than words. Nera, still so young, yet carrying scars invisible to the eye, brought laughter back into the hollow spaces of the ranch. Her joy was not naive, it was defiant, a song sung in a world that had tried to silence her. She chased chickens across the yard, her laughter breaking the stillness, and for the first time in years, Elias found himself smiling without knowing it. Evenings became a ritual of their own. The table, once cold and bare, now carried bread, beans, and the warmth of shared hands setting places. They sat together, the lamplight softening shadows into gold, and words, hesitant at first, began to bloom between them. Tyre spoke of horses she once saw in the desert, wild and untamed, their freedom etched into her memory like fire. Nera whispered dreams she did not yet understand, visions of running, flying, belonging. Even Marisol, guarded as she was, sometimes let the edge of her voice soften as she recalled Harlan Reeves singing old songs off-key, his rough voice chasing away the silence of winter nights. Elias listened, his heart filling with memories not his own, and yet he carried them as though they were. The more he listened, the more the loneliness within him cracked open, letting light spill into corners he had long kept hidden. In those moments he understood that keeping his promise was no longer an obligation alone. It was the beginning of something that reached deeper than he dared name. Healing flowed not only through the land as boards were mended and soil turned fertile again, but through the invisible wounds they all carried. Yet beneath the laughter and the small victories of daily life, tension stirred, delicate but undeniable. Elias felt it in the way his gaze lingered too long when Marisol brushed a strand of hair from her face, in the way Tyre's silence near him felt heavier than distance, in the way Nera's innocent joy sometimes drew a warmth in his chest so sharp it frightened him. He reminded himself of his wife, of vows buried with her, of grief turned to armor. He told himself he was their protector, nothing more. But armor, no matter how heavy, cannot silence a heartbeat forever. One night, as the stars glittered above the porch and the land slept beneath a silver moon, Tyre sat beside him, her voice soft as the night wind. She asked if he missed the trail, if the endless horizon still called to him. He admitted it sometimes did, the freedom, the sky rolling wide, but confessed it was a lonely life, a life without someone waiting at the end. She studied him with a quiet intensity, and though her words faltered, her eyes asked questions neither dared to voice. Their silence brimmed with what-ifs, dangerous as a narrow trail above a canyon. She rose quickly, retreating into the house, leaving Elias with an ache sharp enough to steal his breath. Marisol sensed it, though she never spoke of it. Her eyes lingered on him when she thought he was not looking, measuring him with a gaze that carried both suspicion and something unspoken. She was strong, but Elias saw in her the same loneliness that haunted him, a longing hidden behind layers of steel. Nera, with her open innocence, sometimes leaned close when she laughed, her trust unguarded, her heart untamed. Each of them pulled at him in ways he could not control, not with desire alone, but with the gravity of connection, of belonging, of the fragile possibility of love growing where once only emptiness lived. Still, desire was only a thread woven into a larger tapestry. What bound them more deeply was hardship shared. Together they weathered storms that split the sky and tore shingles from the roof. They chased coyotes from the edge of the pastures, stood shoulder to shoulder when work outpaced their strength, and endured the relentless cruelty of soil that demanded sweat before it offered yield. Each trial bound them closer, each victory a small flame of resilience against the world's harshness. Marisol stood tall through it all, her voice steady even when her hands trembled. Taya's determination was fire itself, her refusal to break kindling courage in those around her. Nera's laughter, even after nights of restless dreams, stitched joy into days that might otherwise have collapsed under the weight of fear. Elias, watching them, felt something within himself break open, not with pain, but with light. For the first time in a decade, he felt the shape of family around him. Not of blood, but of choice, forged through loss and defiance. It frightened him as much as it healed him, because he knew the world beyond their fences would not allow such peace to stand unchallenged. The silence of the valley was fragile, like the pause before a storm. And though laughter filled the evenings, though trust blossomed slowly between them, Elias could not shake the sense that the promise he had made would demand a greater price than he had yet paid. One evening, as the sun bled red across the hills and the ranch glowed with the warmth of life returning, Marisol approached him while he worked upon the roof. Her voice, firm and unwavering, told him what he already knew. They were not helpless. They had survived before, and they would again if they must. He met her gaze with steady conviction, telling her she did not have to survive alone anymore, not while he was here. And for the first time, a smile, fleeting but real, touched her lips. In that fragile moment, they were no longer bound by promise alone, but by choice. As Nera's laughter carried across the yard, calling them to supper, Elias looked down from the roof at the three sisters and felt the weight of his vow deepen into something more powerful than law or blood. They were not simply what had been left behind. They were what made this place alive. They were his charge, his family, his reason to fight, and perhaps one day, his reason to love again. The healing he had thought impossible now stirred within him, a fire lit not by the past, but by the fragile, defiant hope of the future. And yet, as the night fell once more, and coyotes howled in the distance, he felt it again. That quiet tension in the air, the sense of storm crouching on the horizon. Their peace was real, but it was not safe. The world beyond their fences had not forgotten them, and soon it would come knocking. Elias sat in the darkness, the letter's words echoing like a vow he would carry into the teeth of whatever storm approached. Never abandon what is left behind. And as he listened to the laughter inside, blending with the crackle of fire, he knew he was ready to stand against it, no matter the cost. The valley carried a stillness that seemed almost too fragile, the kind that makes the heart listen harder than the ears, sensing a tremor in the horizon before it shows itself. Elias had grown used to silence, but this quiet felt different. It carried weight, like the pause before a storm. He noticed it in the way Marisol's gaze often lingered on the ridgeline, in the way Taya's shoulders tensed when the sound of hooves echoed faintly in the distance, in the way Nera sometimes woke from restless dreams, her laughter dimmed by shadows she could not name. The ranch was alive again, stitched together with sweat, laughter, and fragile hope, yet beneath it ran an unease that none of them could ignore. It came one afternoon when the sun rode high and the air was thick with the scent of earth and sweat. Elias was sharpening a plough blade in the yard, rhythm steady, his hand brushing against the revolver at his hip more out of habit than intent. Then he heard it, the drum of hooves, measured and unhurried, carrying the weight of authority. Dust rose along the trail, and soon a figure appeared, broad-shouldered, his uniform stiff, the polished badge on his chest glinting like cold fire. Sheriff Conrad Dawes. Elias knew him from years ago, a man with a face carved by rules sharper than mercy, a man who bent for no one, not even when bending might save a soul. The sisters stepped onto the porch, unease tightening every line of their bodies. Dawes reined in his horse, his gaze sweeping the yard with practiced judgment, his smile carrying no warmth. He tipped his hat at Elias with the mock courtesy of one who already believed himself in control. "Ward," he drawled, "been a long time since you drifted through my town. Heard you bought yourself Reeves's place." "That's right," Elias answered evenly, his voice steady, though inside he felt the shift of something breaking. The sheriff's eyes landed on the sisters. His gaze sharpened like a blade, slicing through the fragile peace they had built. "And I see you've got company." His words hung heavy, laced with accusation. Marisol stiffened, her chin lifting though her eyes betrayed the fear she would not show. Elias stepped closer, his voice low but firm, declaring them Reeves's daughters, bound not by blood, but by word. Dawes dismounted, the dust swirling around his boots as though stirred by the weight of the law itself. "That's not how the law sees it," he said flatly. "You know what they are. Reeves bought those girls years back. By the book, they're property, not heirs. Property can't own land." The words struck harder than gunfire. Nera paled, retreating half a step behind her sisters. Taya's knuckles whitened against the railing, her fire burning against fear. Elias felt anger coil inside him, a storm he'd carried for years waiting for release. He said they were not property, that Harlan had raised them as daughters, had given them his home and his word. "That's enough for me," Elias finished, his voice rough, unshakable. "Enough for you, maybe," Dawes countered, his tone sharp as iron. "But not enough for the courts, not enough for the men in town. They'll see 3 Apache women living free on white man's land, and they'll call it theft, or worse." He paused, letting the venom sink deeper. "Best hand them over now. Let us keep them where they belong." The silence that followed was suffocating. Elias's mind flared with images. The sisters chained again, sold into cruelty, their laughter extinguished. He thought of Marisol's guarded strength, of Taya's quiet fire, of Nera's open trust. He thought of the graves on the hill and the words etched in ink, "Never abandon what is left behind." When he spoke, the word fell from his lips like steel. "No." The sheriff's eyes narrowed, the twitch of muscle betraying restrained fury. "Careful, Ward. You pit yourself against the law. You won't find friends in this county. You've got a past. Don't make it worse." Elias's jaw tightened. He knew the past the sheriff spoke of, the nights of whiskey and loss after his wife's death, the fights, the mistakes, the near ruin. Shadows clung to him still, but they would not own him now. His voice came steady, forged by the weight of every choice he had made. "I've carried my mistakes, but I won't make this one. You want them, you'll have to come take them." The sisters stared at him, shock mixing with something deeper. Faith, fragile but real. For the first time, they saw not just a man who had promised, but a man who would stand. Dawes's laugh was harsh, humorless. "Always were a fool, Ward, a fool chasing ghosts." Maybe you found a new one." He swung back into his saddle, his gaze lingering on the sisters with a promise of trouble. "This ain't over. The law don't forget, and neither do men like me." The sound of hooves faded into the horizon, leaving behind a silence sharp as broken glass. Elias stood rooted, every muscle coiled, every breath heavy. When he turned, Marisol was watching him, her eyes unreadable, her voice quiet but steady. "You've made an enemy." "Maybe," Elias admitted, "but some enemies are worth having." For the first time, her hand brushed against his arm, brief, fleeting, but real. "And some promises are worth keeping." The sun dipped behind the hills, shadows spilling over the land, but Elias felt no fear. He had chosen his side, and he would not turn back. The storm was coming, he could feel it in the air, but beneath the rising tension flowed something else, something warm, healing, like a thread of light weaving between them all. That night, as the stars stretched across the sky, the four of them sat together on the porch. The silence was no longer empty, but a pact, binding them against what lay ahead. Elias spoke the vow aloud, his voice steady as stone. "Harlan left me this place with a promise, not just the land, you three. Whatever comes, I won't bend. I won't hand you over." Marisol's hand rested on his again, steady this time, not fleeting. Her words rose like a flame, quiet but unshakable. "Then we will stand with you. This ranch is ours, not because law says so, but because we make it so." And as the night deepened, Elias felt the truth settle into him. They were no longer wanderer and orphans bound by chance. They were family, fragile but fierce, defiant against the world. The healing they sought was no longer a dream. It had already begun. Yet even as laughter returned, even as hope dared to breathe, Elias knew the battle was only waiting on the horizon, ready to test the strength of every vow they had spoken. The days that followed Sheriff Dawes's visit pressed down on the ranch like a storm crouched on the horizon, waiting for its chance to break. The sky itself seemed to hold its breath, each sunrise painted with hues of gold and silver that belied the unease gnawing at every heart within those fences. Elias worked from dawn until nightfall with relentless focus, his hands rough with calluses, his muscles aching with the weight of mending what had long been broken. Yet even as he labored, his eyes never strayed far from the ridge or the long trail leading into town, always watchful for the dust of riders who might come bearing law or hatred. The sisters felt it too, their every movement sharpened by the edge of vigilance. Marisol carried herself with a quiet strength that seemed carved from stone, her shoulders squared not only beneath her own burdens, but beneath the invisible weight of her sister's safety. Taya's fire grew brighter, her defiance stronger with every passing day, as though daring the world to strip from her what little they had rebuilt. Nera, though she laughed when she could, lingered near Elias with a trust that was both fragile and fierce, as though his presence alone steadied her against the tremors of fear. And yet, within the walls of the ranch, something softer was blooming. At night, after the day's sweat had dried and the fields lay silent, they gathered on the porch. The crickets sang their healing hymn to the darkness, and the four of them sat shoulder to shoulder, the silence between them no longer hollow but binding. They rarely spoke of the sheriff's threat. Silence was its own pact, but in every glance, every brush of a hand against another, the vow was clear. If the storm came, they would face it together. One evening, as coyotes howled at the edge of the valley, Elias's voice broke the hush. His words carried the weight of something he had long held within. "Harlan Reeves left me this place on a promise," he said, each syllable forged in steel. "Not just the land. He left me the charge to keep safe what he cared for. That means you three. Whatever comes, I won't bend. I won't hand you over." The air held its breath in the space that followed. Marisol's eyes glistened, though no tears fell. Instead, she laid her hand firmly over his, her touch steady, a healing warmth that sank into him deeper than words. "Then we will stand with you," she replied. "This ranch is ours now, not because the law says it is, but because we make it so." The words hung in the air like a vow written in fire and blood, binding them more tightly than any court or badge of authority could. Elias felt their truth echo in his bones. For the first time in years, he no longer felt like a drifter, clinging to shadows of memory. He felt rooted, as if the earth itself had opened to claim him as its own. When the storm finally came, it did not arrive with thunder, but with whispers that crept from the town like poison. Rumors spread. Elias Ward harboring Apache women on a white man's land, defying law and order. Those whispers grew into anger, and anger into threats. One evening, a handful of men arrived, rifles strapped across their backs, dust clinging to their boots, like the venom of their intentions. Dawes did not ride with them, but his shadow was long over their gathering. Elias met them at the gate, revolver holstered, but his stance firm, his eyes unflinching. Marisol, Taya, and Nera stood behind him, silent but steady, their presence stronger than any weapon. The men spat curses, their voices sharp with disdain, demanding the women, calling the ranch a stain, a place unfit for men like them. Elias did not raise his voice, nor did he reach for his gun. Instead, he spoke with a calm that cut deeper than fury. "This is their home. My home. You want to take it. You'll have to take it from me." Something in his voice, in the steel of his gaze, stopped them. Perhaps it was the sight of the sisters standing tall, no longer shadows, but rightful owners of their own fate. Perhaps it was the look of a man who had nothing left to lose but everything left to protect. Whatever it was, the men faltered. One spat in the dust, another cursed, but one by one they turned their horses and rode away, their threats lingering but their courage broken. The ranch grew quiet again, the silence filled not with fear but with relief, and something more, a fragile hope that perhaps they had won a small piece of peace. In the weeks that followed, life began to take root anew. The fields grew greener beneath their care. The walls Elias had mended stood firm against the wind, and laughter spilled from the porch at night, lighter now, no longer bound by dread. The storm had come and passed, leaving behind a sky washed clear, and with that peace the fragile threads of affection began to weave themselves into bonds too strong to be ignored. Marisol's strength softened into partnership, her voice steadying Elias when doubt clawed at him. Taya's fiery independence turned into loyalty, her determination binding her to the land and to him with a force as enduring as stone. Nera's joy, once dimmed by fear, returned in full bloom, her laughter a healing song that reminded them all that hope was not fragile. It was resilient. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the valley and the land glowed with the warmth of renewal, Elias stood at the porch rail with the sisters beside him. Together they looked out over the ranch, once barren and broken, now alive and whole. For Elias, the sight was more than soil and wood. It was the shape of something he had thought forever lost, a family, a home, a reason to stay. The sheriff's shadow might still linger beyond the hills. The world might still spit its hatred. But here, within these fences, they had carved something sacred. And in that moment, Elias allowed himself the quiet peace of a man who believed for the first time in years that tomorrow could hold more than loss. Tomorrow could hold love. The night came soft and silver, stars scattering above like scattered prayers, and Elias breathed in the stillness. The healing he had thought impossible now flowed through the ranch, through the sisters' laughter, through the beating of his own heart. Whatever storms still waited, they would meet them together. And in that certainty lay not only strength, but a warmth deep enough to mend even the oldest wounds. The quiet days that followed carried a deceptive gentleness, as though the valley itself was trying to soothe their wounds with sunlight and birdsong. The ranch breathed again, its walls no longer echoing with emptiness, but filled with the warmth of voices, the rhythm of shared work, and the tender stitching of trust that had taken root between them. Elias rose each morning to the scent of bread baking, to the sight of fields touched by dew like silver tears of healing, and to the sound of the sisters moving through the yard, their laughter weaving with the wind. For a man who had lived so long in silence, each sound, each breath of life within those fences felt like a balm pressed into scars too deep to count. Still, he carried the memory of the sheriff's words like a shadow across his chest. The law had not been defeated, only delayed. Yet the ranch thrived in defiance, each day an act of rebellion against a world determined to strip them of their right to belong. Elias poured his strength into the land, his sweat soaking into the soil as though he could root himself deeper by the sheer will of his labor. Fences stood firm, the barn no longer leaned, the orchard showed timid buds of green, and the earth began to yield its first fragile harvest. The sisters matched him in endurance, their presence no longer hesitant, but fully intertwined with the land. Marisol bore herself like the quiet spine of the household, her voice steady, her hands guiding the rhythm of their days. Elias often caught her watching him with eyes that searched beyond his words, measuring the weight of his promise. Taya's fire never dimmed, her determination carving strength into every task, her silence near him heavy, yet filled with meaning. Nera, still light-hearted and unguarded, filled the air with laughter that scattered the last ashes of grief. Her joy healed not just the house, but Elias's weary spirit, reminding him of the sweetness of innocence that had not been fully destroyed. Evenings brought a sacred stillness. They would sit together, lantern light flickering across faces softened by fatigue, but glowing with quiet contentment. Sometimes Marisol would tell stories of their childhood before it was stolen, her voice low but rich, carrying memories both painful and tender. Sometimes Taya would speak of the land itself, of how its cruelty tested them, but also kept them alive. Nera would share her dreams, wild, unshaped visions of freedom and belonging that made Elias's chest ache with a longing he had buried years ago. In their words he found pieces of himself, fragments of dreams he thought forever gone. And yet, beneath the tenderness, temptation stirred. Elias felt it in every glance that lingered too long, in every moment of silence too full to be ignored. Marisol's guarded strength drew him like a flame he dared not touch. Her loneliness mirrored his own so precisely it cut into him. Taya's quiet presence, her nearness in the fields, carried a warmth that lingered long after she had walked away. Nera's unfiltered joy filled him with a sweetness that frightened him with its purity, a reminder of the daughter he had never held. Each of them pulled at him in ways he could not name without betraying his own vows. He told himself his duty was protection, not desire. He told himself his word was a shield, not a bridge toward longing. But in the still hours, lying awake beneath the vast expanse of stars, he felt the storm of his heart rising. The armor of grief he had carried for so long had begun to crack, and through those cracks spilled light he had thought forever extinguished. One evening, after a long day repairing the corral, Elias sat on the porch with a bottle of whiskey untouched beside him. Taya came out, her hands rough with work, dirt smudged across her dress, her face glowing faintly beneath the moonlight. She sat near him, her silence natural, like a stream flowing beside stone. After a long pause, she asked softly if he ever missed the trail. He admitted he sometimes did, the endless sky, the rhythm of hoofbeats, the freedom of miles beneath him, but confessed it was a lonely freedom, one that hollowed more than it gave. Her eyes studied him in the half-dark, her voice tightening as she asked if he thought he had found something different here. He did not answer right away, his gaze fixed on the land that stretched before them, the land that had begun to feel like his, not by ownership, but by belonging. Finally he murmured, "Maybe. Time will tell." Their eyes met, holding more than words, the question unspoken but burning. Taya rose quickly, her voice tight as she wished him good night, leaving Elias with a sharp ache lodged deep in his chest. He watched her slip back into the house, her absence as heavy as her presence had been, and felt the dangerous truth stirring between them. Marisol, too, felt the shifting tide. She kept her distance, her strength wrapped around her like armor, yet her gaze betrayed the loneliness she fought to hide. Elias respected her strength, admired her resolve, but he also saw in her eyes the echo of his own yearning, the fear of trust, the hunger for it all the same. Nera, in her innocence, leaned into him without hesitation, her laughter brushing against him like sunlight, her openness stirring a tenderness he did not know how to hold without trembling. The days pressed forward, each one binding them closer, not only by labor and survival, but by the fragile threads of desire and hope. They faced storms together, the wind ripping shingles from the roof, rain flooding the pastures, predators testing the boundaries of their fences. Each trial was a forge, shaping them into something stronger than before, their bond tempered by hardship and fire. One afternoon, after a storm tore through the valley, Marisol stood at the edge of the barn as Elias repaired the roof. Her voice, firm and steady, rose to him. "We are not helpless. We have survived before. We will survive again." Elias met her eyes, answering with a conviction that carried the weight of every vow he had made. "You don't have to do it alone anymore. Not while I'm here." For the first time, a smile flickered across her lips, fleeting but real. "Then maybe," she said quietly, "we will survive together." That moment carved itself into Elias's heart like a brand. They were no longer bound by chance alone. They were choosing, piece by piece, to stand as one. It frightened him, the depth of it, but it also healed him in ways he had thought impossible. Still, the shadow of the sheriff's words lingered, the echo of hatred carried on the wind. The ranch, alive with laughter and fragile joy, stood as defiance against the world beyond the fences. Elias knew peace here could never be permanent, but he also knew this: he would fight for it, for them, for the family they had become. And as Nera's laughter spilled from the doorway that evening, calling them in for supper, he felt the warmth of belonging burn brighter than fear. The night deepened, the stars glowed steady, and in the hush of the valley Elias whispered to himself the vow he had taken and would never break: never abandon what is left behind. And as the sisters' voices rose inside, blending with the crackle of firelight, he felt a healing so deep it stitched itself into the marrow of his being. Whatever storm awaited, they would endure it together, and within that truth lay the promise of something greater than survival, the promise of love, fragile but fierce, blooming where once there had only been loss. The summer sun poured over the valley with a relentless glow, yet within the fences of the ranch, life unfolded in rhythms that softened the harshness of the land. Morning after morning, Elias rose before the light touched the hills, his body moving with purpose, his heart steadied by the sight of the house no longer shrouded in emptiness. He watched the sisters begin their days, Marisol at the table with ledgers and tasks, her presence anchoring the household, Taya walking the fields beside him with sleeves rolled up, her hands raw but determined. Nera chasing chickens with laughter that rang like music across the yard. It was a harmony stitched together by effort and defiance, fragile yet whole. Each day carved away another layer of loneliness from Elias's soul, replacing it with a belonging he had not dared to dream of. He had thought healing would come in silence, in forgetting, but instead it came through voices, through shared meals, through the simple act of someone waiting when the day's work was done. It came in the way Marisol sometimes let her eyes linger on him, heavy with unspoken questions, in the way Taya's quiet companionship eased the sharp edges of labor, in the way Nera's laughter carried him back to memories of the child he and his wife had once dreamed of but never held. It was dangerous, he knew. The world beyond their land would see scandal, would call it sin, would spit hatred upon what they were building. But the world had already taken enough. Here they chose each other, and in that choice lay a power greater than law. At night, beneath lantern light, the air thick with the scent of bread and beans, conversation stretched longer than it once had. They spoke not only of chores, but of dreams, dreams of a ranch that could stand proud, of orchards heavy with fruit, of fields strong with harvest. Nera's eyes glowed as she spoke of freedom, of belonging, of laughter without fear. Taya's voice carried a determination that refused to bend, a promise that she would not let the land or life break her. Marisol's tone softened when she spoke of Harlan and his wife, their kindness, their love, and the way they had filled an emptiness no one else would have dared to see. Elias listened, each word weaving itself into the fabric of his heart. In those moments, he realized this was no longer only about honoring a promise to a dead man. It was about creating something alive, something enduring. Yet beneath the warmth of trust, temptation burned. The air between them often felt charged, every glance too long, every brush of hands too heavy with meaning. Elias resisted, holding fast to his vow, but in the stillness of night he could not silence the ache within him. Marisol's guarded strength drew him like the pull of gravity. her silence filled with the same longing that haunted him. Taya's presence beside him, her nearness in the fields, left warmth in his chest that lingered long after she had gone. Nera's innocence and trust touched a tenderness in him that felt like both healing and pain. He told himself he was their protector, that his role was duty, not desire. But no man could live on duty alone, and his heart, once armored by grief, was stirring with life again. The ranch tested them as much as it healed them. Storms tore across the valley, lashing wind and rain against the walls. Together they rebuilt, hammering boards into place, binding wounds of wood and spirit alike. A coyote crept too near the henhouse one night, but Taya's fierce cry sent it scattering, her courage blazing like fire in the darkness. Days of drought followed, the soil cracking beneath the sun's merciless gaze, but Marisol's steady hand rationed every drop of water, her determination unyielding. Through it all, Nera's laughter refused to fade, her joy defying even the hardest days. Elias saw in each of them not weakness but strength carved from pain, and he felt the weight of his vow deepen into love, love not yet spoken, but pulsing through every moment, every choice, every breath. And still the shadow of Sheriff Dawes lingered. Rumors spread like dry brush fire, carried from town to town. Elias Ward, harboring Apache women, defying the law, daring to claim what the world would not grant. One evening, riders came, rifles slung across their backs, anger in their eyes. Elias stood at the gate, unflinching, his revolver at his side but untouched. Marisol, Taya, and Nera stood behind him, silent yet unyielding. The men cursed, demanded the women, called the ranch a stain upon the land. Elias's voice, calm but carved from steel, answered them. "This is their home, my home. You'll not take it unless you take me first." The words cut sharper than threats. Something in his eyes, the steady resolve of a man who had nothing left to lose but everything left to protect, stilled the riders. Perhaps it was the sight of the sisters, no longer shadows, but women standing tall in their own right. Perhaps it was the silence of the valley itself, pressing against them until their courage broke. One by one they turned away, spitting dust as they left, their hatred unspent, but their will undone. When quiet returned, the four of them stood in the yard, the air thick with the echo of what had almost been lost. Marisol's hand brushed against Elias's arm, no longer fleeting but firm, her touch anchoring him to the ground he had chosen. Taya's eyes burned with fire, not of fear, but of pride. Nera laughed, relief spilling out of her in bright notes, her joy breaking the tension. In that moment, they were not bound by fear, but by choice. Family, defiance, love. The weeks that followed carried with them a new rhythm, softer, warmer. The ranch flourished under their care, fields greening, walls standing strong, orchards blooming with the promise of fruit. At night, laughter spilled from the porch, no longer strained but full, carrying across the valley like a hymn of healing. Marisol's guarded heart softened into partnership, her strength no longer solitary but shared. Taya's fire tempered into loyalty, her defiance reshaped into fierce devotion. Nera's joy blossomed, radiant and untamed, a song of freedom that reminded them all that hope was not fragile but unbreakable. One evening, as the sun dipped into the hills, Elias stood with the sisters at the porch rail. The land spread before them, no longer barren, but alive, a reflection of what they had become. For Elias, the sight was more than fences and soil. It was belonging, the shape of a family he had thought he would never know again. The sheriff's threats might return, the world might still spit its venom, but within these fences they had carved something untouchable. A home reborn from loss, a family bound not by blood but by love, and a future daring enough to believe in its own survival. As the stars rose, scattering silver across the sky, Elias breathed deeply, the air carrying not fear but peace. He had once been a wanderer, lost to grief, adrift in silence. Now, with 3 souls beside him, laughter in the air, and healing rooted deep within the land, he understood the truth of the vow that had brought him here. Never abandon what is left behind. It was no longer a command written in ink, but a promise etched into his very soul. Whatever storm might still come, whatever enemy might rise, he would not turn back. Together they would endure. Together they would love. And in that quiet certainty, beneath the endless night sky, Elias allowed himself to believe that tomorrow was not a threat, but a gift, waiting to be opened with the dawn. The valley breathed in quiet harmony, as though the land itself had chosen to cradle them in peace after so much storm. Days unfolded with a rhythm that soothed their weary hearts, dawn breaking with silver dew, afternoons golden with labor and laughter, evenings softened by the hum of crickets and the glow of lamplight through the windows of the once broken house. Elias found himself marveling at the transformation, not just of the ranch, but of his own soul. Where there had once been silence and grief, there now lived warmth, voices, and the fragile but steady pulse of belonging. The fields grew green beneath their hands. Fences that had once sagged under years of neglect now stood tall, defiant against the wind. The barn, once leaning like a tired man, rose proud after their work, its roof catching the light of sunset like a crown of copper. The orchard, which Elias had thought beyond saving, stretched hopeful branches toward the sky, small blossoms unfolding into fruit, as if healed by the simple act of love. Every nail hammered, every seed sown, every burden shared became part of something greater than survival. It was a life they were building together, a home carved out of defiance and tenderness. Marisol walked the land with a steadiness that no longer masked only caution, but carried pride. Her strength, once braced for betrayal, had softened into partnership, her eyes lifting to meet Elias's without the shadow of suspicion. Sometimes, when the evening fell soft and the air smelled of bread cooling on the windowsill, her hand brushed his as naturally as breath, no longer hesitant, but certain. She was no longer a girl bracing against the world. She was a woman standing tall beside him, her healing woven through every word she spoke. Tyre's fire burned brighter than ever, but now it was tempered, focused. She worked beside Elias from dawn until dusk, her sleeves rolled, her laughter rare but fierce when it came. In her silence, there was no longer distance but devotion, her presence steady as stone. She had once been wary of trust, but now her very nearness was trust itself, her quiet gaze often carrying more than words could dare. When storms threatened the crops or coyotes prowled the fences, it was Tyre who stood closest, her resolve unshakable, her spirit like a flame that would not be extinguished. Nera, still young, yet grown into a grace shaped by hardship, carried joy like a banner against the cruelty of the world. Her laughter filled the ranch, scattering the last remnants of fear that once clung to its walls. She moved with a lightness that healed simply by existing, her innocence defying all the weight of what had been stolen from her. Elias often found himself watching her as though she were proof that life could mend itself, that broken things could still bloom. She was the embodiment of hope unbroken, and her presence alone reminded them all that healing was not a fragile gift, but a resilient one. Elias himself changed most of all. He had arrived with nothing but ghosts in his heart and dust in his soul, a man who believed his purpose had died with the woman he once loved. But here, among three sisters who had been left behind by the world, yet refused to bow to it, he discovered that grief could turn to strength, that silence could break into song. Each day he worked the land, he felt roots growing deeper, not only into the soil, but into the lives that had intertwined with his. He was no longer a wanderer, no longer a man drifting toward death. He was a protector, a partner, a father figure, and perhaps, in ways unspoken but undeniable, a man learning to love again. Together, they stood against whispers from town, against men who came with rifles and hatred in their eyes. Each time Elias met them with calm steel, and each time the sisters stood beside him, silent but fierce, until the enemies turned away. With every trial, their bond deepened. They were no longer shadows surviving at the edge of the world. They were a family, their home defended not only by walls and fences, but by the strength of their choice to remain together. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and painted the hills in gold, Elias stood on the porch rail with Marisol, Taya, and Nera beside him. The land stretched before them, alive and whole, no longer scarred by abandonment. The fields glowed with harvest, the orchard whispered with the promise of fruit, and the air itself seemed to hum with peace. For Elias, the sight was more than land. It was the shape of love reborn, fragile yet unyielding, a testament to what they had endured and created. The stars rose one by one, their silver light casting blessings across the valley. Elias breathed deeply, his chest no longer heavy with ghosts, but light with gratitude. The sisters leaned close, their presence steady and healing, and he understood then that what they had built together could never be undone, not by law, not by hatred, not by the cruelty of a world that had once tried to strip them of everything. They were bound not by chance, but by love, not by fear, but by choice. And within those fences they had carved something eternal. The night deepened, carrying laughter through the windows, the kind of laughter born from wounds that had healed into strength. It was the laughter of family, of trust, of a home that would not fall. And in that laughter was the promise of tomorrow. Uncertain, yes, but filled with hope, with love, with the healing truth that nothing left behind need ever be abandoned again. If this story has touched something gentle in your heart, if you have felt even a spark of warmth, healing, or hope as you walked through these words, I invite you to leave your thoughts in the comments. Share what it stirred in you, for your voice matters here. And if you wish to continue walking this path of stories with me, if you wish to hear more tales of love, resilience, and the healing power of belonging, then please like this story, subscribe, and keep close to the journey. For sometimes, the smallest act of staying, of choosing, of not abandoning, creates the greatest love of all.